Thank you, Laurie. Hello, everyone. My name is Casey Stewart. I'm a board member here with the Buffalo Niagara River Land Trust. I'm also a professor of health, wellness, and climate at Dieuville University. And so I'm really excited to welcome you all to tonight's edition of Conservation Conversations. It's a mouthful, but it's catchy. So welcome. We have a really exciting program for you tonight. As you know, or maybe you don't know, I don't know who's new to this program, this organization, but the Buffalo Niagara River Land Trust is incredibly unique in that of all the land trusts in the United States of America, our great country, very few, in fact, I don't think any others, focus specifically on brownfields, on rescuing the most abused and neglected lands and recovering them, finding ways to protect them and restore them. Most land trusts go out and say, where's the most pristine, beautiful, untouched woods, quote unquote, wilderness out there, and let's protect that. Buffalo Niagara River Land Trust does the exact opposite. What's the most destroyed, toxic stuff that we can find? And guess what? Buffalo, where you guys live, is full of it. Throw a rock anywhere, you're in brownfield. So tonight's speaker is my friend, really, I say the brother that I never had and always wish I had, Dr. Nick Henshue. And so 3 years ago, when I was hired at the university at Buffalo as a postdoc, I walked into the hallway and started setting up my office, and this guy comes in and says, where are you from? And I said, Pennsylvania. And he said, where at? And I said, well, Chester County, kind of outside of Philadelphia. He goes, well, where at? And it turned out he was from Pennsylvania too. Turns out we're both Pennsylvania Dutch boys. And it turns out we both love the woods and the wilderness, and we love hiking, and we love birds and frogs and salamanders and woodworking and all kinds of stuff. And so I've had many conversations in classes, outside of classes, over beers, over wings. We just had some wings and beer before we came here, if this is a long-winded intro. And so I've learned from Nick that all of those neglected spaces that the Land Trust really focuses on are full of life. And that's something that we don't always think about. We always think about the toxins, but Nick's really helped me to think about the life in those places. And so, as you may or may not have heard of this 19th century scientist, Charles Darwin, many people know about his theories of evolution, but at the end of his life, he was working on worms. And so today there's only 6 people in the world that study worms. And tonight you have someone who studies worms, interviewed by the BBC, about worms. And so one of the world's foremost experts on worms is about to talk to you. And so
Mississippi State called me this morning.
Did they?
We have a new worm. Can you identify it? We're sending it up.
Did you identify it?
I don't know.
Oh.
I don't know what's going to happen. How did I get here?
Yikes.
Yikes.
So he can tell you all about worms and a bunch of other stuff. So this is really critical to the work that we do at the Land Trust, and he can tell you all about it. He's a professor of ecology at SUNY Buffalo and an Eagle Scout. So without further ado, Dr. Nick Henshue.
First of all, thank you so much for coming out. This is amazing. I'm really proud of the work that the Land Trust and the Black Rock Riverside Alliance and all of these organizations that I see represented here tonight, and how they've really rallied in Buffalo, and how they've really kind of brought so many great people together. And in keeping with Casey's, Dr. Stewart's wonderful introduction, I'm going to tell you another story. Because, teaching is just storytelling with a purpose, right? And so 8 years ago, in the middle of July, I defended my dissertation. I went back to school. I'm a recovering public high school teacher, and I don't go to meetings anymore, but I'm doing pretty good. And I left the classroom burned out and loved kids. Got really tired of No Child Left Behind and state mandated testing and all of these things. And so at 35, I went back for a PhD. And the day I defended my dissertation, they were like, congratulations, you're a doctor. And my phone vibrated. And I thought, that's weird, man, because everybody I know is in this room right now watching me explain what I've done with the last 5 years of my life in studying earthworms. It really, I think more people were there out of curiosity. And I look at my phone and it's a message from the dean of the College of Arts and Sciences offering me a job. Literally the exact day that I defended, I got hired at UB. So my wife comes around the corner and says, how'd you do? And I said, well, I passed. I'm a doctor. And I said, and how do you feel about buffalo? And she said, I don't know. And we went home and we talked to our parents about it. And what do you know about buffalo? Well, it's cold, and then it's all rusty and dirty, and it's like Detroit light. You get your ass shot. Like, it's not nice. It's not what we were told Buffalo was outside of Western New York. Is not what we've found. We moved up here 8 years ago. We will never go anywhere else. And I'll tell you why. It's not only is it a city of good neighbors, I'm going to tell you how good the neighbors are. My first landlord is here. Where'd you go, Bob? There's Bob back there. Our next door neighbors are here. And so what we found was this incredible city with an incredibly rich history. And that incredibly rich history really starts with the remote not working on cue, the shipping that you all know existed, right? For a long period of time, every loaf of bread that was made in the United States came through the port of Buffalo. All the grain that was shipped throughout the world came through these silos. And what that led to was an incredible amount of shipping traffic that led to an incredible amount of kind of a transient population, but also a very well-to-do population of merchants and manufacturing and more remotes that don't work. And come on, baby, I'm giving you lots of segues there. Here we go. So we see things like the 300 block of Main Street back in 1907. We've got areas like Ellicott Square, right? Back when we were just youths. Right? This is 1905. Where is Ellicott Square? I'm not from here. It's down where the library is, says the authority. But we also have a legacy of some problematic types of things. Our dear friend Lois Gibbs and all of her friends for the Love Canal Homeowners Association really brought this entire thing to light, and it has become the really quintessential case textbook study in grassroots organizations and what people that are committed to a cause can actually do. And so the videos don't work, and that's terrific. We're missing an HDMI cable, and so we're kind of patching it together, but you'll get the idea. What that's left behind is a lot of areas that are neglected. A lot of areas that are no longer used for businesses or for industry, things that have been neglected, things that have been marginalized, right? Lots and lots of areas of old factories. We're careful to use the term brownfield. As many of you know, for something to be called a brownfield in the state of New York, that means there's paperwork, right? It's registered with the state. Whereas a post-industrial area or a post-industrial ecosystem, my very good friend Dave Spearing, Dr. Dave Spearing, really used that term a ton in his research of post-industrial ecosystem. And so I'm going to talk a lot about pies, and it's not just because I'm a fat kid. The pie is actually a really important part of what we think about and what we do. But the end of the story here is that, as we all know in this room, Buffalo isn't just about chicken wings and snowstorms. It's about a lot of great momentum. It's about a lot of rebuilding. We've never been in this kind of situation where the the public interest, the political pressure, the resurgence of businesses and service industries is as strong and as meaningful as it is right now. This is the time that we can act, and we are. We are. These organizations, the BlackRock, the Riverside Alliance, the one of my favorite stories is I was talking with Ann, and this is years and years ago. I don't know if you ever even remember this, but you said, you know, I'm so glad that you live in BlackRock because you get it. Like, it's just this wonderful feeling of being home. And so what this video would show is incredible drone footage of the silos and the shipping canal and the Buffalo River, and what if I hit okay? Nope, not even a little bit. So there's a 3-minute interlude here that I would do a song and a dance about, right? And it goes up over the medical campus and all these wonderful areas downtown that have been really revitalized. What I want you to think about tonight is areas that are much smaller, much more in keeping with what the Buffalo Niagara River Land Trust is interested in saving, what the Land Trust is interested in facilitating the improvement of. And that starts with this amazing bit of the story. This is the Niagara River Greenway, and it is very politically fancy. Basically, it's a lot of energy, money from the land, from the river, and the communities that adjoin the river are allowed to capitalize on that in terms of grants and funding. But what I want you to think about here is these are the communities that are involved in that greenway, and that greenway is terrific. There's lots of parks that are in there. There's everything from really from down in the city all the way up basically to St. Catharines. Have these wonderful park spaces and playgrounds and schoolyard habitats. And I'm here tonight to ask not the River Greenway, us, to also consider habitat connectivity, especially in smaller areas, especially where they can make a huge difference for animals, plants, pollinators, seeds that are traveling from one side of the Great Lakes to the other. If you're a little bird, you look at Lake Ontario and you think, hell no, I can't make it over that. I'm a little bird. And then you look at Lake Erie, probably on Google Maps or something, right? And again, very far distance, very dangerous, treacherous to travel over that. So then you go the path of least resistance, which of course is along the Niagara River, over Grand Island, down along through Buffalo. Why do you think Tift and Forest Lawn are our favorite places to go during warbler season? So if this is such an important greenway, then let's lean into it. Let's not just think about schoolyards and playgrounds as all of this, but also backyard habitat. And I want you to think about, for each little tiny bullet point, where does this fit into your organization? Where does this fit into your goals? And where does it fit into your hobbies? Because when it's a hobby, it's a lot easier to do, right? So this, again, is just really the beginning of a very basic framework, but it looks something like this. Is all of the facets of this project really connect integrally with each other. And so I'm a dirt guy. I study earthworms, I study dirt, I teach soil ecology and restoration ecology, and now urban ecology, and that's going to be a really cool class. I'm doing a field trip every single week. I was writing the syllabus today. I'm super geeked about it. So Uh, but when we think, and I know this is tough if you're in the back there, Laurie, you might have binoculars that you can maybe use, but believe it or not, if you've ever done anything with soils, you're familiar with the soil classification system and the Web Soil Survey and the NRDC soil things, and it's like SY233BY sandy loam on a Salamanca style plate from a whatever, right? It's silty clay loam from the Cattaraugus formation, whatever, like crazy words that very specifically identify soil types. Their silt, sand, clay, their texture, their water holding capability, and there is zero classification system for urban soils. It's just urban soils. So the soil types that are found on the grounds around Tonawanda Coke, for instance, are classified the exact same way that the dry cleaner on the corner of where was that? Bidwell, and there was another, believe me, and as a dry cleaner, as the soils, the bricks, and the concrete that make up the substrate at Silo City, all classified urban soils, full stop. What we need to do is have a soil classification system for anthropic soils that are, hey, this is a lot of brick and some concrete. All right, well, that's going to be a little bit higher pH, right? It's going to be a little bit basic. Oh, hey, this is a soil that has full of hydrocarbons, right? There was an oil refinery. There's a lot of coal, slag, and old coal tars that are wound up in that, because the plants that we're trying to restore those habitats with are going to be selective about what soils they want to grow in. And if we just say, oh, it's urban soil, that doesn't tell us how to fix it. We need a classification system that says, okay, this is primarily crushed glass and slate. This is mostly sand with some tar in it. We'll come up with better words than that, but maybe black-eyed Susans and Joe Pyeweeds really, really like one of those, and New York ironweed and cardinal flower, my dear friend Uncle Dave O'Donnell back there, that the cardinal flower is his favorite. Maybe they like a completely different type of soil. We don't know that. It's not in the literature. It's not been scientifically shown. It's not necessarily common knowledge in restoration circles. So we need to characterize those soils. Then we need to figure out toxicity loading in those various locations in Western New York. Because if you've ever happened to buy the $39 Geiger counter from Amazon and driven around Niagara Falls, it is a very pretty picture. It's all kinds of colors. And so we actually need to know where some of this toxicity is. And the state does. But if we had a better handle on where the hydrocarbons were, where the radioactivity was, where the chromium and lead and arsenic and zinc, where those areas are, if we can characterize those, we can start to figure out plant communities and functional groups of plants that will go back into those soils. We need to learn about the soils first, because everything starts with soils. Without good soils, you're dirt poor. That's where it all starts. Then we got to think about the ability for the success of soil microbes and invertebrates that are in the soils. Like, how many of you have had my soil ecology class? Just one. Okay. All right. Well, but it was a really good class. You could tell, one kid. So what we do is basically look at bugs in the soil for half of the semester. And there's a whole world under there, things that you never even knew existed. All kinds of different mites and nematodes and calembulas and all sorts of things that are magical. And they're all living in the soil beneath our feet. And they matter to the soils as well. They need to be characterized along with the types of these anthropic soils and how they all live together with plants. And most importantly, with the things we're just learning right now about mycorrhizal fungi. and the wood wide web, and arbuscular mycorrhizal hyphae that are talking from one tree to another. Oh, hey, this tree over here is dying. The big mother tree will shunt nutrients out through her hyphae and send them to the tree that is injured through fungal networks in the forest floor. The plants are talking to each other. The fungi and the bacteria are what are keeping the soils alive and keeping the plants happy. 85% of all angiosperms, which is all seeded plants that aren't pine trees, for those of you that haven't been in bio for a couple of minutes, 85% of all angiosperms have a obligate mutualism with fungi. 85% of plants don't live or don't live very well without soil fungi on their roots. They're really important. That soil health is crucial, and we don't know about that behavior within these anthropic soils. But then that got me to thinking about, native plants. And once we characterize the soils, now we can start to identify what plants need to be successful. And maybe we start to look at functional groups and why is it that Joe Pyeweed and black-eyed Susan, Rudbeckia, and Monarda are always together? Is it because they're friends and they have some kind of biological symbiosis with those mycorrhizal fungi that we haven't really thought about much yet? Or do they just like the same habitat? We don't know that. And so once we can figure out what the success of the fungi is, and we can start to think about the seeds and the plants in functional groups. And so then when Helen Vick, the project manager, goes out to a site, she looks at the soil, she says, it's a Henshue type of soil. We're going to plant these 5 plants and they're going to be successful. Wouldn't it be nice for restoration ecologists to be able to say, oh, hey, it's this, let's do that? We don't know. We don't have that cookbook written yet. And then we need seed guilds for replanting those natives with toxicants and climate tolerance. Last month, you heard Kenny Parker, another very, very dear friend of ours, talk about the importance of hyper-localism. Right? Those native plants must be, if you really want to do it right, they've got to be from within 90 miles of the host seed-bearing plant. Well, in restoration situations, we need to talk about that because maybe we find a population of, I keep using black-eyed Susan, Rudbeckias. There's 14 different species of black-eyed Susan, and some of them really, really thrive on serpentine soils. Serpentine soils are naturally very heavy metal laden. Well, hey, let's get the ones that are tolerant of the heavy metals and put them in the heavy metal restoration sites. So we can still do native and local and all of those things that are super important, but sometimes we need to think about the exact subvarieties. As long as they're close cousins, in restoration, we might need to do that. Come along now. Well, then I got to thinking a lot about pollinators and the things that make these plants grow. And the fact that, in New York, did you know that in New York State alone, there are 450 different species of bees? It's not just big dumb honeybees and bigger dumb bumblebees that crash into your deck. 450 different species of native pollinator bees that are in the state of New York alone. Most of them are solitary. Most of them are subterranean for all but about 2 weeks of the year. And the majority of them have one specific host plant that they require in order to thrive. I like how all the native plant, Kathy's back there and Sylva's back there, they're all like, yeah, like, Say it louder for the people in the back. Okay, well, see, that's the problem, is you came early enough to church, you got a back row seat. So here's the problem with that, is if we start to build things for pollinators, are we Pied Pipering our blessed bees into an early death because the soils are too toxic for them? So how do we deal with that? And we don't know that yet. So we need to do some work. We need to do some work. But you know, being able to look at where pollinators are and where they thrive and where they prefer to be, that gets me to thinking a lot about geospatial and remote sensing sorts of data, and thinking about like where the connectivity makes the most sense for migrating pollinators, where the connectivity makes the most sense for having pollinators to have these novel search areas. And so one of the things that my classes are actually doing with Sylvan this spring is looking at habitat connectivity for sites that Grassroots Gardens could specifically think about investing in. If we get GIS people involved, right? Once you get the computer types involved, then we can really do some cool stuff, because then we can also think about greenway connectivity for seed dispersal. Does it make sense? The wonderful restoration site that Buffalo Niagara River Land Trust, yeah, I got that right, I think, did over on the corner of along Niagara Street, where the trestle goes over. It's by the blue porn store. That one. That restoration site is absolutely terrific with native plants and shoreline restoration, but is it connected enough that the seeds that are there can disperse into the next most connected area? And those are things that we can think about when we look at large-scale remote sensing data and utilize geographic information systems to do that. The other thing we can do is we can start to think about how to prioritize restoration efforts based on nearest neighbor optimization, like the most likely place that a bee or a seed will go, right, based on ecological modeling. And then we can also think about how better areas that have these native plants, and you've all heard the gospel of Doug Tallamy, and we know that you know, having native, local, hyper local plants in our lives leads to better health outcomes. Many of you were at the talk that Jeff Donovan did last year at UB, where he actually showed, like, and we were like, yeah, okay, whatever. And then he whipped out all the stats, and we're like, oh, he did. He showed where incidents of emerald ash borer killing ash trees along streets in Portland was directly connected to increased cardiovascular disease. It was, I was skeptical as hell at first too. I'm like, well, there's no way. And then he lays the whole thing out. You're like, whoa. And that's just one example of thousands of examples that when people have healthy plants and healthy environments, they're healthier. If healthier people are living in our neighborhoods, they're happier. They're better neighborhoods. So it becomes now very much a justice issue and an equity issue, because now I can target the areas where post-industrial remediation will lead to greater health outcomes, and I can start small. I can start with the silly traffic triangle that's at Ontario and Tonawanda and whatever other street that is that over there. Okay, yeah, I'm not from here. And I can think about where those areas that they're not Western New York Land Conservancy sized parcels. They're vacant lots. They're highway rights of way. They're traffic triangles. But they all matter to a bee that's smaller than the end of your pinky. Those post-industrial restoration sites, we build them in order to build climate resiliency. We already know that people in the old First Ward are going to massively see effects of increased SAISH events, increased storm events, right? The Western New York's leading authority on SAISH events, right there, Jay Burney. Jay, how screwed are they? There we go. Thank you, Jay. And so building community resilience with shoreline management, right? With flood mitigation types of plantings, with flood mitigation type structures that are nature-based solutions, suddenly becomes a big priority. And increased permeable surfaces, as you all know, how much concrete do we really need? If we have the availability of infiltration, that water doesn't have to go into the storm drains. And you know what? Western New York's Authority on Combined Sewer Overflows, Helen Vick. If there's less impermeable surfaces, there's less CSO overflows. And if there's less CSO overflows, there's less dookie water coming up into people's basements. What a concept. All of that's going to lead to more SAISH and more protection, right? Because here's the thing, is we're here tonight talking about marginalized properties, areas that are post-industrial or vacant or not really being used for the way that they need to be used. And here's the thing, is that all of this, right? Marginalized properties build marginalized communities. And marginalized communities, you know who lives there? Marginalized people. We can fix that. We can help that. We can make a difference in that. What happens is that we start to see the secondary effects of green space improving local economies, local health outcomes. If health outcomes are better, economies are better. If economies are better, we have all kinds of new opportunities for people to do. One of the biggest challenges, and you talk to any Kathy Catrino back there from CW Plant Farms, you talk to Joseph Hahn, you talk to Kenny Parker, right? What's the biggest problem with getting native plants onto restoration sites? Where the hell do you buy native plants? So they went and started their own nurseries because they were tired of waiting for Home Depot to do the right thing. What happens when we can train people in green infrastructure? What happens when we can train people in stormwater management? And this green economy becomes part of everyone's neighborhood. They started doing it, right? Massachusetts Have Project with the storm drains and the rooftop gardens and all these wonderful things. Let's spread that great word. Let's do that great work. Because now, once we have these novel ways makes sense to us, of looking at restoration, now we've got a funding machine that in 3 years is going to come back to life from the government, we hope. And it's going to be an incredible ability to really do the right thing for ecosystems. We do the right thing for ecosystems, it's really easy to get involved at multiple different community levels, right? I remember, and I'm sure many of you do too, growing up, it was right at kind of the peak of when starlings really got to be a nuisance of an invasive. Like, they'd been around since 1914, released in Central Park by the dipshit that liked Shakespeare and thought that if they were in King Lear, they should be in Central Park. And so he ordered 20 breeding pairs of starlings. And now we have billions of them, but that happened only really in the 80s. And what happened was the starlings kind of ate all the eastern bluebirds out of house and home. So you remember like 30 years ago, the big push, every church group, every youth group, every scout group was all building bluebird boxes? Everybody built friggin' bluebird boxes. Build a bluebird box, save the bluebirds. It started with communities, and there's never been more bluebirds than there is now. We can do this with community involvement. Elementary schools having gardens. Scout groups building birdhouses and bee nests. Right? We're already doing that. We have groups in Buffalo that are already doing that work as outreach. So now we start to really get the entire community involved and bring everybody back together, right? So now we have this connectivity where it's not just about soils, and it's not just about pollinators, it's not just about dirt. But how do we think about an entire system? How do we think like an ecosystem? In the words of Aldo Leopold, how do we think like a mountain? How do we put that together and make that happen? Because this place is really incredible. And we all know that, right? You wouldn't be here if it wasn't. How do we make it work? Well, for the grad students that I've had in the room, I apologize for triggering you. This is called a Gantt chart. And we do this with graduate students to figure out, when they have to write their thesis and get the hell out. And what you'd see if you were here is kind of a calendar of like, we need to start soil qualification, collection. What does those soils look like? We need to know what pollinators are already there. I want to do pollinator studies in some of the post-industrial areas and see what's actually living there before we go get nuts about, we got to save the bees. Well, maybe there's bees already there. We don't know. But what that does is start to classify the guilds of plants, the guilds of pollinators, and we can look at the connectivity between those areas. By identifying those areas, we're now able to identify neighborhoods as areas of focus, areas of concern, but in the best possible way. Now, how do we start to offer restoration and green infrastructure courses? Right, our next step is working with Erie County Corrections and with green infrastructure training and how we get native plant gardening done, right? And we get skills for people who need some skills. We add some pollinator curriculums and activity guides for different schools and different long-term projects for Mrs. Jones's science class. Right? And we're all starting to talk on the same page. Because all of these things together, you have reached the end of the document. There you go. All of these things together make that entire package work. And it doesn't just work with one crazy professor from UB. It works with everybody working in tandem and enhancing everyone else's work, echoing everyone else's work. Right? And so by doing this together in very small segments, before you know it, you end up with half a state being certified in wildlife habitat. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen in little tiny pieces. It happens together, everybody doing it at the same time. So that's my message.